review for whether it was helmet-to-helmet targeting. And of course, there's some talk about how that rule should progress in college. I would say, I'll just take a very brief aside. I would say that they should still target, or I'm sorry, still review targeting. That they should change it to like a flagrant 1 and flagrant 2, like they have in the NBA for basketball, and talk about that more later. That would just real quickly be how I would address that. But the point is that they should have that in the NFL too, where you can review that and or pass interference. In the CFL, you can actually review for pass interference. And I believe he brought up a number that like 42 of 83, I want to say, or 41 of 83. So right around 50%, I believe it was, of those reviews for pass interference got overturned. And so it's an effective system, apparently, the way they do it there. And of course, or additionally, you may say, Sean Payton, who's on the competition committee for the NFL, and Bill Belichick, who, no matter what you say about him, if, like if the NFL is not listening to him on these things, like obviously they're not going to listen to anybody. Two of the most influential coaches, two of the longest lasting and tenured coaches in the league, they've both been calling for the NFL to incorporate a review for pass interference for years. And, part of that is because they're two of the smartest football people around. It should be common sense. But to use kind of an old movie line, but frankly, my dears, the NFL don't give a damn. It just doesn't. And that's the sad reality. We can hold out hope that needed changes are made, but we shouldn't hold our breath. The Saints won't be playing in the Super Bowl, and the NFL likely won't even care. And to some extent, it's just like, why do we even care? But I think it's because that's who we are. As Saints fans, as New Orleanians, been through a lot worse, certainly off the football field. This is nothing, frankly. And yet, make no mistake about it, like this destroyed us. And it will continue to gnaw at us. And this is probably the most important angle, I think. It'll gnaw at us probably to a greater degree than the Minnesota, or is it Minneapolis Miracle? Because on that play, safety Marcus Williams could have and should have made a stop. Should have made the tackle. That's as simple as our player not making a play. That was within our team's control. Sunday's game is different. It was completely outside of our control. That Minnesota ending is still impossible to watch. Anytime I see that commercial that shows it, I turn away. I can't watch it. I imagine I'll never willingly watch the pass interference, though, either. And yet this is so much worse, while being simultaneously better. If you're like me, you've gone through several stages of grief already. By Tuesday, I had advanced to kind of a masochistic stage where I could handle hearing and reading about the play and that game. I don't think I advanced that quickly through last year's playoff disappointment. But I also never had a masochistic stage. As I said, I still haven't really watched that play or tried to bring it to mind. I'd rather put it off and pretend it didn't happen. But you can't do that with this game. This game I won't forget, and specifically that play. It's impossible. But we will get over it, I believe. It will take a long time, probably. But we will get over it. It may be a year from now when we're finally raising the Hallis trophy that we should have been raising this year. Or maybe it'll be longer. But eventually we'll recover. It's who Saints fans are. It's who New Orleanians are. It's what we do. The other part that sucks, as Sean Payton mentioned after the game, this was the last game this team will play together. The Saints have 22 free agents, and we know many of them will not return in 2019. And that sucks. This was one of the most fun journeys we've had as Saints fans. This felt like a Super Bowl team, but it wasn't to be. And we'll get to players who are likely to be back and possible additions later, and those who won't be back. For now, let's celebrate this team. Whether it is a parade or simply in your hearts and minds, thanking them for an amazing season. We may never get the kind of justice from the NFL we deem as necessary. We got robbed, it's true. But the NFL cannot rob us of the most important thing, our joy and our love of this team. Celebrate that, even in times of felt injustice. And two other things I want to talk about real quick, not related to the Saints, but related to Southeast Louisiana sports. So, one, shout out to Will Wade and the LSU basketball team. If you haven't been paying attention or watching, and that would be understandable if you haven't, they're undefeated in SEC play. Undefeated at home, and they went into last night's win against Georgia, ranked number 25 in the country. Between what I'm calling the college version of the Splash Brothers, the backcourt duo of Tremont Waters and Skylar Mays, and the frontcourt excellence of Cavell, Big B Williams, and Naz Reid. This LSU team is starting to look like a team who could do some real damage in March. It's a fun team to watch. They can score almost at will. And the defensive effort seems to improve each game. Even though they still have some lapses at the end of games, and maybe let teams off the hook a little bit and get back in games. They're still improving. They're still young. I mean, Tremont Waters, as a sophomore, is a veteran on this team, as is Skylar Mays. But there's so much talent. Will Wade's done a good job coaching them, I think. So at this point, they're, I would say, almost a lock to make it to the tournament, which, considering where they were at last year and where the program has been the last 5 years or so, that's pretty exciting for Tigers fans. So if you have a chance, I would just encourage you, get out to the Maravich Center, watch one of the remaining home games before it's too late. This is a fun basketball team to watch. And number two, and last, and I'll end with this, there were some reports yesterday that the Washington Wizards might be shopping wing forward Otto Porter Jr. And I realize there's plenty of teams who could be looking to add his services, if you will. But to me, he's the guy who would take the Pelicans, from what is a very oddly constructed roster to one that could actually work. I really think he's the missing piece. And I know he's got a huge salary. I think his cap number is $24 million or something like that. So it would take a lot to make a trade work in terms of the cap numbers, because they have to be within, I think, 110% or whatever it is when you're making a trade. So it would take probably a Solo Hill and Nico Mirotic at least, and it may even take a three-team trade to make it work. But I'm sure the Wizards, given where they are, they would probably love to add some expiring contracts. I think they're probably, rightly or wrongly, trying to gear up for another potential Kevin Durant free agent run, and hoping that they might be able to sway him to come back home to DC, and getting rid of Porter and his contract would do a lot, and especially if they had expiring contracts coming back to him. And from a Pelicans perspective, you just think about it, like, I do feel that this team needs to make one more move to even out the roster. It's so big heavy right now. And even though Mirotic isn't necessarily your typical big, he's also not a guy you really feel comfortable playing at the 3. And I don't think anyone in New Orleans trusts Solo Hill. And yeah, I think you need a more traditional 3 to kind of even out the roster, since there really isn't a guy who you feel comfortable with at that position. And he could be the kind of guy that could make the Pelicans competitive the rest of this season and potentially show signs that they're able to win in the future. And it might be the sort of thing that's needed to convince Anthony Davis to stick around the Crescent City for years to come. Of course, his contract is likely to be up after this season. So I would love to see that move. If maybe there's another move out there that's similar, but might not be as difficult to pull off given the financials and all of that. With the NBA trade deadline coming up, I'm sure we'll probably have a podcast where we talk about that. I hope, potential moves that the Pelicans could make beyond that. But those are just a couple quick thoughts in addition to the bulk of this podcast. So until next time, when I hope to have my friend James McGovern on, and hopefully get the whole gang back on soon, after we've all recovered from Sunday and start talking about the off season. So until then, as always, who dat and go Tigers.